Here at Imola, at the conclusion of this afternoon's final qualifying session for tomorrow's San Marino Grand Prix, I sadly have to report that the news is bad. 20 minutes into the 1 hour session, the very popular Austrian driver, Roland Ratzenberger, unaccountably went off the circuit at some 190 miles an hour, straight into a concrete barrier at the side of the track.
And welcome back to the Hot Lap. We're talking Roland Ratzenberger, 30 years ago. 30th anniversary at the very least. Yeah, at the time of recording, it's now hit midnight on Tuesday, the 30th of April. Tuesday the 30th of April 1994 was going to be Roland Ratzenberger's last ever qualifying session. No, he didn't even make it to the race. In fact, he'd only actually raced in one Formula One race at all. So, his stats, well, whilst not the best, let's be honest. I mean, first race was the 1994 Pacific Grand Prix. His best qualifying, 26th, pretty much last. But his best finish in that race was 11th. Those stats don't mean absolutely anything because this guy was a lot better, at least than his Formula One stats showed. Roland Ratzenberger, people have been so nice about him as well. And it's not just because, yes, let's be nice about the person that passed away, etc. No, let's not do that. One of his closest friends, in fact, Johnny Herbert, has said many really, really interesting things. And 24 hours, previously to Ayrton Senna passing away, it was this man. And in fact, when Ayrton Senna, what they found in Ayrton Senna's car was an Austrian flag, which incidentally he was leading the San Marino Grand Prix. And whether he won or not, he was going to be waving that flag. Alas, he didn't either. One of the darkest, if not the darkest weekend in Formula One, especially particularly modern Formula One. Yeah, really, really sad. So let's who was Roland Ratzenberger? He was a lot more than the other guy that some people want to talk about that died before Senna, which I think's really, really unfair, and I think we need to remember him. So Roland Ratzenberger, on the 30th of April 1994, he lost his life when he crashed out during qualifying for that San Marino Grand Prix, the result of the front wing of his Simtek coming off. He'd only started one race, as I said, a fortnight previously, and that was Ada. That was the Pacific Grand Prix. And at 33 years old, he'd amassed a wealth of experience, but not all of that in Formula One. However, he was hugely respected by those he raced against. Now, unlike a lot of F1 drivers at the time in 1994, his path to the top had been a long one. One major step was taken in October the 26th, 1986. Funny enough, that was the day that other people might remember as Nigel Mansell's spectacular tyre failure in Adelaide, and that handed that year's World Championship to Alain Prost. However, it was also the day that Roland won at Brands Hatch, namely the Formula Ford Festival, firmly marking himself out as a man of the future. Other people, such as Johnny Herbert, won that. And that evening, the beaming Austrian celebrated in Kent, in the Kentagon, the crowded bar at the top of Paddock Bend. Now, among the first to congratulate him was the guy I just mentioned, Johnny Herbert, and they both chatted about their hopes for the future. Roland had recently signed to drive for BMW in the new World Touring Car Championship, while Johnny was headed towards British F3 with Eddie Jordan. Both men at the time had lofty ambitions. I mean, Herbert said, "We talked about where the journey was leading us, had the difficult times, and then won the festival. I won the festival the year before, and then had a difficult 1986. And we discussed how things can go so well and then turn against you." Remarkably, obviously, Johnny Herbert would end up being a Grand Prix winner. Alas, Ratzenberger never really got the chance. And with no parental support, he'd already spent an age trying to get his career off the ground. He worked as a mechanic for less talented drivers. And how frustrating must that have been for him instructing people and them at racing schools. The BMW deal for 1987 was the first time he'd actually earned any proper money. Now, always good at winning people over with his big smile and genuine charm, he later found enough sponsorship to compete in both F3 and Formula 3000. And when he ran out of options, he moved into sports car to keep his career afloat. Now, this big break came in 1991 when he landed a drive with the Saab Toyota team in Japan. He soon emerged as a major force, which led to changes in the domestic F3000 series. So in Japan, he did earn quite good money, but F1 always remained this man's goal. When at the end of 1993, opportunities finally opened up for this guy and his F3000 rivals. Hello, Eddie Irvine and Heinz Howard Frentzen. Fairly esteemed company in the world of F1. Now, Roland was happy for them, but with them going and him not, he was, let's just say, a little envious. He loved F1, said Eddie Irvine. He was addicted to it, and it was amazing how much he wanted it. He had a great career in Japan, but he just kept pushing for F1, especially when me and Frentzen, him and Frentzen were jumping across. It must have been tough for him, but he's saying it also encouraged him. Now, Roland's own chance would come with that new Simtech team, following an introduction by Gerhard Berger's manager at the time, Mr. Hummel, or Burkhard Hummel. I'm sure I got that wrong, but he's well known for an Austrian wheeler dealer who helped Roland informally. Now, over the winter of that 93 to 94, Roland put a deal together, having landed support from a wealthy Monaco-based German who had kind of taken a shine to him. He'd got the backing of Barbara Bellew. I may have got that wrong, but that's what the Simtech boss Nick Worth said. He said she had befriended Roland and decided that she should support his motor racing career. So she put a lot of money up, which helped him to get the drive and us to get the team together. It was really with her backing, Roland's tenacity and the help, that the whole thing had come together. And he was a similar age to me, very driven, and I just liked him. From what we could tell, he seemed to have the credentials, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Now, eventually, a deal was agreed for Roland. Drive the second car alongside David Brabham, yes, Jack Brabham's son, and he was finally an F1 driver. But initially, his contract only covered the first 6 races, and others with more money circling, the others were there with more money circling around. Roland knew he had to do a good job from the start of the season. When I heard about it, I was really happy for him, said Herbert. I knew how hungry he had been. I knew how frustrated he was as a typical driver, knowing that a couple of us had got our way into it. He finally had the backing that he needed to get himself the chance. And when I saw him, I remember giving him a bit of a hug and saying, "You've made it." He said, "It's been a little tougher for me than you." He was probably the very last one who had been his own mechanic, working on his own Formula Ford car, who, he got to F1. And there was little time for testing, and Roland's chassis was only finished on the eve of the Brazilian Grand Prix. We started off with a big pile of bits in the garage, trying to build this car that's nicking from dust and bolts, says Brabham's engineer, Rob Nelson. We didn't have enough bits to build the car, but we got him out. With 2 cars failing to qualify each race and Simtech fighting with fellow newcomers Pacific for the last spots on the field, the pressure was on. Beset by mechanical gremlins and still learning his way around the Simtech named S941, Roland was devastated when he missed the cut. It was you race or you don't race, you succeed or you fail, said Nick Worth, boss of Simtech. Pressure like that, like they don't have now. If you don't make it in Q3 into Q2, big deal. In 1994, you go home if you don't make it. Now, with the new team, new cars, what we were up against, and then the pressures of the battle with Pacific to qualify, it was a bloody steep learning curve. However, Roland impressed with the small team, with his knowledge and his approach. Now, the whole car was just thrown together really quickly, said his race engineer. We didn't have any time to do any proper testing. It's not surprising that there are 1 or 2 problems. You knew it wasn't bleeping you. He wanted to succeed as much as we did. I remember thinking, bloody hell, this guy knows what's going on in the car, he would say. I need to find more time in myself, which is very refreshing to come across in a driver, a totally top bloke to work with. Second time out in Ida, Roland missed Friday qualifying after a crash in the morning. Nevertheless, he made it finally into the field on that Saturday. The following day, he managed to bring the car safely home in 11th and last place. Now today, that would have been just 1 place out of the points. Starting, I think 26th, finishing 11th. To get both cars home in Japan was an unbelievable thing. It really was, says Nick Worth. The odds were stacked against us. Everybody knew the province of the Pacific. It was a Rory Brown car, and they had a Mario Ilian V10 engine. Remember that? Mario Ilian V10 engine. Mercedes, eventually. We had no chance, and to prove the doubters wrong was something extremely satisfying. I was so happy for Roland as well, because I knew how disappointed he was from Brazil and how much it all meant to him. It was crikey, we're on our way now. However, Ratzenberger was frustrated with his own performance, especially in those slow corners. It was all in his ability to get the slow corners right, which drove him nuts, said Worth. In the high-speed corners, he was bang on the pace with David, and was sometimes quicker. But he couldn't get his head around the best way to get an F1 car to go around a slow corner. And that's really what held him back in terms of bravery and commitment, which is typically shown in, those high-speed corners, just like today. He wasn't lacking any of that. So Roland drove from his Monaco home to the next race at Imola in his new Porsche, accompanied by his friend and fellow Benetton driver, JJ Leto. He'd recently bought an apartment in his native Salzburg, having saved years to be able to afford it, and someone travelled to Italy to hand him the keys. After years of commuting to and from Japan, his life was changing. I think at the time, his sponsor was thinking of extending the period that she was committing to, said Nick Worth. It was something like the first 4 or 6 races, and we'd see what would happen. She hadn't been to the first 2 races and turned up in Imola. On Friday, Roland struggled with the brakes, and at one stage the team decided to put Brabham in his car. It was not the best scenario for either of us to be in, trying to do an F1, a small F1 team with very few resources at that. Now, he was struggling, Brabham recalls, a bit in terms of getting the best out of the brakes. He kept complaining about the brakes. He didn't feel that they were working properly. On the Friday, I jumped in his car just to verify what was being said, because Brabham had more experience with these brakes, and he said they were not particularly good. He used another 4-letter word. Basically, and what he was complaining about was absolutely right. Roland was vindicated when the Aussie backed his assessment. Certainly when we got the brakes, he made good progress, said Brabham. And I thought, great, there's some competition with the team. And all of a sudden, there he was, where he should have been. He was happier with the car. He was happier with the brakes. And his pace was a lot closer. When he did go out with the new brakes, his pace was a lot quicker. You felt like his momentum was going to start to build, and he was going to push me, which would have been good for me too, said Brabham. Friday night was real soul-searching stuff, said Worth. We all knew, and I talked to Roland a lot about it, and he was going to have to dig really deep. And I think that was the part of the whole thing that went off on Saturday. That intense pressure to get the job done. Now, meanwhile, the big story was that huge crash for Rubens Barrichello, lucky to escape any major injury. I spoke to Roland on Friday, said Herbert. We just discussed what we'd seen, how violent it was. That was scary. He mentioned that we should stick together a little bit more about the safety stuff. That whole weekend was really bad karma hanging over the place, said Worth. On Friday, Rubens had a shunt. There was just something wrong. Friday wasn't smooth for us. There was just a funny feeling the whole weekend. It's kind of creepy, isn't it? Worth saying that. And he carried on saying, I don't believe in such things, but I remember going Saturday morning thinking something's not right. I remember just not feeling happy about Saturday for whatever reason. But we thought we were in a chance of getting both cars in again. Now, with his car working more effectively, Roland was indeed in an optimistic mood. Following Barrichello's accident, the entry was down to 25, which meant that he had just to beat one Pacific, in effect that of the tardy Paul Belmondo, to make the grid. He was very upbeat. He was always positive, said Corbett. He was certainly looking forward to qualifying. I think he felt that almost for the first time he could put in a good performance, and he was probably chirpier than he normally was. If you look at the circumstances now, he was just so desperate, said Worth. He had his sponsors there. Japan was the first time he'd got into a race. He'd wanted to do it again. He'd had that taste. Now, early in the session, Roland was indeed faster than the other Pacific. Simtex data would indicate that on a subsequent lap, he had a minor excursion and had then given the steering wheel a shake to ensure that all was okay and to clean the tyres. He then went for another quick lap. I would have done exactly that, said Corbett. You're on a roll, you're in the car, it feels good, left, right with the steering, make sure everything feels right, and then go for it again. Under normal circumstances, that would have been fine. He didn't lose a lot of time, but it was enough for him to think, I'd better check the car, said Brabham. Looking at the data, he'd zigzagged and braked, and in his mind, he'd be saying, do I come in and check it? I can understand why he didn't. He couldn't have felt that there was an issue with the front wing, and off he went. And that lap is when he didn't come round. So, lots of people have said so many lovely things about Roland. I mean, Johnny Herbert was really, you know, as I said, was really close to him. And I mean, here we go here. I mean, Roland Ratzenberger, Johnny Herbert saying he didn't have a background of money, and the early days it was pretty much just a transit van and a, you know, he's saying a transit van and a trailer, but he won one of the biggest races in a young driver's career. We've already spoken about it. It was the Formula Ford Festival, and then he did Japan. Sadly, we never really saw the best of Roland, he said. He wasn't a journeyman type whatsoever. He was a very talented man. And even Damon Hill's come out and said he was someone I respected because he had pretty much followed a similar route to myself. Damon Hill, like Roland Ratzenberger, started quite late in his career. And he'd got into a Formula One car at 31, said Damon, quite late in his career, but he stuck at it. He was a guy who loved being a racing driver. He was very talented and able, very talented, able and very competitive. And even Max Mosley, he said Ratzenberger, he's saying was more tragic than Ayrton because he'd come up by his own efforts, and other people had the help of his family. Yes, he had the help of his family, but they didn't have the money like a lot of other F1 drivers did then and now. And he said he'd no money. He'd done it by his own work. He was a thoroughly good person. Ratzenberger's death would have been a very big thing, except that Senna's came the next day. And that's what really, sadly, for Ratzenberger, but just the whole thing being sad, because, it's absolutely devastating with Ayrton, but it does, Ayrton Senna, known around the world. And then suddenly, Ratzenberger obviously wasn't forgot, not by the F1 fans, but by the general public as a whole, the general news. He wasn't going to be, on too many newspapers after that. That's why I think we absolutely have to remember him every 30th of April. So, and one thing that really got me was Max Mosley. When Ratzenberger died, Mosley had to make a decision about which funeral to attend. And I didn't know this. I've never been a fan of Max Mosley. I don't dislike him, but I've never really been a fan. Let's just say I wouldn't exchange Christmas cards with him. But Mosley, with the passing of Senna and the passing of Ratzenberger, he had to make a decision. And he said, I went to Ratzenberger's funeral rather than to Senna's, where all the greats and good of Formula One were, because I felt somebody needed to support him and his family. He said it was desperately sad because Ratzenberger hadn't had what Ayrton had. At least Ayrton had the success and the brilliant recognition worldwide, the state funeral in Brazil, and so on. Ratzenberger was just as dead, and it was just as sad for his family, but he'd never experienced all that. Lamented the former FIA president. Yeah, I mean, it was sad, and fair play, 110% fair play for Max Mosley. I mean, that was an absolutely amazing thing to do. But one thing that did surprise me, and one thing I did learn today, that I wasn't, doing as you do. You do the research. Ratzenberger was actually in the BTCC. Now, we've just obviously had the Donington weekend at the time of recording this.
And Weaver.
And here we go. I just want to show you this footage because it's brilliant. Ratzenberger in the BTCC.
Passing Kevin Eaton's Toyota on the left there as they go into the right-hander at Redgate. Well, Jones is through. Now Ratzenberger with the left-hand drive BMW is through. On to the old hairpin. 6 cars approach it, and 3 of them are lapping the other 3. Just look at this. Ratzenberger and Weaver are past Jones.
Oh,
look
at Donington, of all places.
Ratzenberger's car, that's Weaver behind in 9th position. Up now to McLean's. Ratzenberger is 8th. Weaver in the white BMW is 9th. And they're both coming up to lap Tony Crudgington's Toyota Corolla at Coppice. They do so. Through they go. Ratzenberger first, then Weaver.
I mean, I'll leave it there, but absolutely amazing stuff. That's something that I didn't even know. I mean, if we look at the, what is it? I think the stats. He did do touring cars, didn't he? British Touring Car Champion in 1988 with, let's be fair, one of the best liveried cars with Demon Tweaks Racing in the BMW. His best finish ended up being, I think, 8th. It would appear, but still. Yeah, this guy, absolute legend. Born 1960, obviously passed away April the 30th, 1994, at a far too young age of 33 in his Simtech Ford. Yeah. I'll be having one for you this evening, Roland. And I, for one, I'm never going to forget. Thank you very much. Thank you.